"She doesn't love you," my neighbor said one cold October evening, his voice low but sharp enough to cut straight through my chest. I remember the way the wind carried his words, like they were meant to haunt me long after he had gone inside. I didn't answer right away. I just stood there, staring at the dim light glowing from my living room window, where she sat, unaware of what had just been said about her. Then I turned to him slowly, my voice quieter than I expected, and asked, "Do you? Before we go further, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and the power of love to change lives, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Stories like this only matter if they reach hearts that still care." His name was Thomas, a retired mechanic who had lived next door longer than anyone else on our street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. He was the kind of man who noticed things others ignored, like how often the porch light stayed on past midnight or how many mornings I left for work looking like I hadn't slept at all. That evening, he had been raking leaves when he said those words, as if he had been holding them in for weeks. I didn't wait for his answer. I didn't want one. Because deep down, I already knew what he would say, and I wasn't ready to hear it out loud. Her name was Rebecca. I met her 3 years earlier in a small bookstore downtown, the kind that smelled like coffee and old paper. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, flipping through a novel, completely unaware that she was blocking the aisle. I had cleared my throat twice before she looked up, startled, and apologized with a nervous smile that somehow stayed with me long after I left. Rebecca had this way of making the world feel softer. In the beginning, everything about us felt effortless. We spent weekends driving nowhere, talking about everything from childhood memories to dreams we were too afraid to admit out loud. She told me she had been hurt before, that trust didn't come easy for her. I told her I would wait, that I wasn't going anywhere. And I meant it. But love doesn't always fade all at once. Sometimes it slips away quietly, like a shadow retreating at sunset. You don't notice it until the light is gone. It started with small things. Missed calls. Shorter conversations. Nights when she said she was tired and went to bed early, leaving me alone in the living room with the television playing to no one. I told myself it was stress, that her job at the hospital was overwhelming. She worked long shifts as a nurse, dealing with more pain and loss than anyone should have to carry. I tried to be understanding. I cooked dinner, cleaned the house, left little notes for her to find in the morning. I thought if I gave more, loved harder, something would shift back into place. But it didn't. There were moments when I would catch her staring off into the distance, her eyes somewhere far away from me. When I asked what she was thinking about, she would smile faintly and say, "Nothing." That word began to feel heavier than any truth she could have told. Thomas wasn't the first to notice. My sister, Margaret, had hinted at it during a family dinner months earlier. She had pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay between us. I brushed it off, told her she was imagining things. But people see what we refuse to. The night Thomas said those words, something inside me finally cracked. Not all at once, but enough to let doubt flood in where certainty used to live. I stood there in the cold long after he had gone inside, replaying every moment, every silence, every unanswered question. When I walked back into the house, Rebecca was sitting on the couch, her legs tucked under her, a blanket draped over her shoulders. The soft glow of the lamp illuminated her face, and for a moment, everything felt like it used to. Like we were still the couple who laughed over burnt pancakes and late-night movies. She looked up at me and smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. That was the moment I knew something had to change. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever lived through. It's a strange kind of pain, loving someone who feels just out of reach. Like standing in the ocean, watching the tide pull away, knowing you can't stop it no matter how tightly you try to hold on. I started to notice things I had ignored before. How she flinched slightly when I touched her arm. How conversations felt forced, like we were both reading from scripts we didn't believe in anymore. The silence between us grew louder with each passing day. One evening, after another quiet dinner, I sat across from her at the kitchen table and finally asked the question I had been avoiding. I didn't accuse her. I didn't raise my voice. I just asked if she was happy. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she stared at her hands, twisting the ring on her finger like it was suddenly too heavy to wear. When she finally looked up, there were tears in her eyes. And in that moment, I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to see before. She wasn't just distant. She was hurting. What followed wasn't a dramatic confession or a sudden ending. It was something quieter, more complicated. She told me about the weight she carried every day at the hospital. About the patients she couldn't save. The families she had to comfort while holding back her own grief. She said she felt like she was disappearing, like she had nothing left to give by the time she came home. It wasn't that she didn't love me. It was that she didn't know how to anymore. Hearing that didn't fix everything. It didn't magically bring us back to where we were. But it changed something inside me. For the first time, I stopped trying to fix us and started trying to understand her. Love, I realized, isn't always about grand gestures or constant happiness. Sometimes it's about standing beside someone in their darkest moments, even when they don't have the strength to stand for themselves. The weeks that followed were different. Not perfect, but real. We started talking more honestly, even when it was uncomfortable. There were nights when we sat in silence, not because we were drifting apart, but because we were learning how to be present with each other again. I encouraged her to take time for herself, to rest, to seek help when she needed it. And slowly, piece by piece, I saw glimpses of the woman I had fallen in love with. Not all at once. But enough to hold on to. Thomas noticed the change too. One afternoon, as we both worked in our yards, he glanced over at me and gave a small nod. He didn't say anything, and he didn't need to. Because sometimes, healing doesn't announce itself. It just shows up quietly, like sunlight breaking through after a long storm. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something personal. If this story is touching your heart in any way, take a moment to like, comment, and share it with someone who might need to hear it. You never know whose life it could reach. And before we come to the end, here's something special. Comment, second chances still matter, if you believe love is worth fighting for, even when it gets hard. It's been over a year since that night on the porch. Rebecca still has difficult days, and so do I. We're not perfect, and we never will be. But we've learned something far more important than perfection. We've learned how to stay. Stay when it's easier to walk away. Stay when silence feels safer than truth. Stay when love doesn't look like it used to. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels still, I think back to Thomas's words. She doesn't love you. Maybe, in that moment, he was right. But love isn't a fixed thing. It isn't something you either have or don't. It's something that can break, fade, and, if you're willing to fight for it, be built again, stronger than before. So if you're standing in your own version of that cold October night, wondering whether to hold on or let go, remember this. Sometimes, the question isn't whether someone loves you. Sometimes, it's whether you're both willing to learn how to love again. And that makes all the difference.